Hello everyone, Xandero Gaming coming at y'all with another video. And yes, everybody has been asking for it in the chats and comments of my videos. And I've been taking a while to do another competitive tier list video. Mainly just because, you know, we've had so many sets come out. I feel like in Union Arena, it's kind of hard to give you guys a really thought out, very fleshed out tier list video with so many things that keep coming out. But I need to start doing them again, so I am going to be doing this one. Now, just to be very specific, this is a competitive tier list, right? So your favorite deck may not be on here. I only really wanted to put decks that I thought were competitive level decks. So even though this says here, you know, like best deck in format, tier 1, tier 2, gatekeepers, and outside looking in, to just state best deck in format, I should put a little apostrophe S thing on there. These are just the best decks in the format, right? I'll change that to say S, like best decks in format. It just means like essentially what the meta is really, right? In Union Arena, so many decks are viable that there's not one clearly best deck in the format, although I do think that there are probably 3. And if I really wanted to do that, I'd have to make like another tier, but there should be a way to separate. We'll go through this list and you'll see the couple of decks that I'm probably talking about. But there is no tier 0 meta deck in Union Arena, which is something that we're, really, fortunate to be in. But on this particular tier list video, I'm going to get into it. I just wanted to preface a lot so we don't get flamed in chat. But I am putting essentially every buildable deck from the Black Clover set on here, and then also maybe I need to zoom this in a little more. Sorry, y'all. That looks a little small. Okay, maybe that's a little better. Oh, God, now we can't see the decks down here because this silly ad. Well, we're just going to have to deal with the ads. Whatever. I want y'all to be able to see the decks that I'm talking about. This thing is going to get a free ad on me, I guess, unless I decide to edit the video and literally throw down an image down here, which I probably will do, to be completely honest. We're going to get this ad out of here. I'll put a little Union Arena thing or something down here. But like I was saying, every Black Clover deck and every buildable JJK deck I am adding to this tier list, mainly because those are newer sets. I want to kind of give everyone an opinion where I think they will sit in the meta or outside looking in, right? Essentially, anything that'll be on the outside looking in is probably a deck that I don't even foresee being able to win, maybe like a locals, even though in Union Arena, this is stated, this is in a very competitive setting, right? So I'm talking about these decks win your locals, 9 times out of 10, they have a high chance of doing it, or they are topping in tournaments. So every deck listed here, outside of some stragglers that I had to list from Black Clover and Jujutsukaisen, are competitive decks, right? But let's go in and kind of like set off what I think is going to be one of the best decks in format, just to kind of give us somewhere to go with, right? I'm skipping over the hunterxhunter decks. None of these I think are in that kind of best decks in the format tier, but I do want to say that Kurapika is kind of one of those decks where it is always very, very, very competitive. It is almost essentially like a gatekeeper. Like maybe I'll change this tier 1. This is like Gatekeeper to be in the best decks in format. And then Gatekeeper here is just what it takes for you to be like a very high-end meta deck that you have to be able to beat to even be able to top. And I think that Kurapika is a nice spot to put because he does always show up in tournaments every now and then, right? Like he's always prevalent in the meta. Now, I don't think that he is one of the best decks in the format, even though he is one of my favorite decks. And I'll go into matchups a little bit more as we get this kind of fleshed out a little bit better, right? But with that being said, the hunterxhunter decks, I do think that Blue Bomber and Gone are very good gatekeeper decks into like this like competitive, tournaments, right? If you show up to say a 8 or 10 round event and your deck can't actively, consistently, beat a Gone or a Bomber deck, then you're going to have a hard time. Now, I don't think that these competitive decks are worse enough to be on the outside looking in. I do think that these are both very viable decks that you can bring into a big tournament and do well with them, but they're definitely on the lower end of the competitive scene, and they are great examples of gatekeeper decks. Blue Bomber being a very consistent control deck. If you can't get your BP high enough or establish a board fast enough, Blue Bomber can really kind of, this is more control oriented, gatekeepery kind of competitive deck. And then Gone and Friends, I believe, is like a universally like have 8 different raid target, consistent, like Union Arena deck. It is one of the quintessential, like, this is what Union Arena does. I think if Gone had a little bit better, way to clear off bodies, it would be a little bit better of a deck, but it is what it is, a very consistent, strong deck. You could do really well at this deck in your local tournaments. You could take it probably to a big competitive tournament and, probably go 6-2 in like an 8-round event. I do believe that Gone is really good, but I don't think that either of these two decks are good enough to top a tournament, right? Which I do think that these best decking formats and this tier 1 are decks that could probably do so. So that is all the Hunter decks. Now we are going into Bleach, and I know that Bleach just had its updated, Volume 2 stuff. So I think we should skip over Bleach, and we do the new Bleach, and old Bleach decks, the new Black Clover decks, the JJK stuff, and stuff like that. So let's go into stuff that isn't so new. And that is going to put us all the way towards codegeass, right? Purple codegeass is still one of the best decks in the format. I do think that it gets, ousted. I will go ahead and say that I don't think it's the absolute best deck in the format. I do think that Blue JJK is now, consistently doing that. But Kurapika and Purple codegeass, if most people know me, these are my two favorite decks to play in the game at the moment. Even though, a couple other decks are pushing it for me, but I love that both of these decks stay pretty consistent. If you're looking to top a tournament, then Purple codegeass, even winning a tournament, Purple codegeass is definitely one of the best decks that you can take into a tournament and do well with, and it is a great establish of what one of the best decks in the format does do. Now, I only have 3 codegeass decks on here because these really are the only 3 that ever kind of really show up, and I do want to touch on Suzaku. I think Suzaku is in the same vein as Kurapika. These two guys are going to stay hand in hand with what they do in the game because they are very similar decks in the sense that, Suzaku is definitely a more, if you high roll, you definitely compete really, really well, whereas Kurapika is a little bit slower, but, a little bit more controlly, being able to keep that snipe and impact going through, where you could just choose not to block the Suzaku and still keep your board right, where Kurapika forces you to have to lose some of your boards. So different play styles, but two really good decks. They're on the cusp of being some of the best decks in format, but I do think they get ousted right now because we are in such a very hyper aggro aggressive format. And I think that is why Purple codegeass shines so well, because it can be very aggressive with the different, 12 different raid targets that you can play, and get some offensive powers from your Gurrens, and then also have the Galwain give you that minus DP across the board is just absolutely so strong. Now, the last one is going to be the Academy deck, and I do think that this is still a great gatekeeper deck. We've seen one top in the last month. I think a lot of people, this deck just isn't as fun to play, but it is, it's going to be on the bottom. It'll probably be the very last deck here on this gatekeeper kind of thing. I do think you can still take this into tournaments and probably do pretty decent, but I think in that sense, I will put it on the outside looking in, because I do think that whenever Academy came out, it had this play style that other archetypes have not established yet, right? Which is kind of like an aggressive play style, but now I really do think that the deck is aged enough, and a lot of other decks are very consistent to where it really doesn't have a spot to do really, really well in the current competitive scene of Union Arena, and it's mainly because of the BP threshold on this deck, right? Oh, excuse me. The BP threshold on this deck being so low, and so many decks having ways to be at 4,000. I do think that when the deck came out, it was definitely a menace, and it is still a consistent deck. I could see one of these topping, maybe going, like 5-3 in an 8-round tournament, managing to sneak in some tops somewhere here and there. Still a very powerful deck that you need to look out for, but I think that so many other decks do what this deck does now in such a better way. That is the codegeass decks. Now we are going to the demonslayer decks, and I do think that Muzan is not quite a, tournament kind of big tournament topping deck, and it is really, really slow. And I think that it is on the outside looking in. I think that there is a better deck than Muzan currently, and we will get to that one in a moment. It's just a little too slow, and you will see this like win your random local tournaments and stuff like that. But I don't think that it's a consistent enough able to get to what it wants to do until we get the support for it. I do think Muzan will be something you can take viably into a huge tournament and maybe even top with it later on. But right now it is on the outside looking in. You can maybe break even at a big tournament with Muzan, sneak some wins off of people if you high roll a little bit, but it is just lacking a little bit. In needing like some more raid targets and stuff, but it's not a bad deck, right? Like either of these decks are still very powerful decks in the Union Arena trading card game, but in a competitive sense, I do think that they are lacking a little bit. Now, with that being said, staying with the Demon Slayer deck, I do think that the trio deck, along the sense of like Gone, is a very just good Union Arena, have a bunch of different raid targets, put a lot of aggression on your opponent, and you could do some really cool stuff with this deck. I think it's just not very popular as well. Running around Inosuke, you get to run some Tanjiros in it, your Zenitsus, and your Tengens. I think that enough people just aren't playing this deck. I do believe in this deck a lot. It is really strong. It can compete with a lot of the aggression some of these other decks put in. And I think that if I had to give my opinion off of it, I do think that this deck is probably a little bit better than, these two decks, but it just doesn't have very many tops. It only has one top in the last month of any of the tournaments we've had going on, where Gone and Friends has had like 3 and Bomber has had 2. So with that sense, I think I just have to keep it down here with these Gatecreeper decks. Along the same vein, I still believe in Hashira's. I will definitely, it has the same as the Gone 3 tops in the last month. I think the play rate of Hashira's has dropped a lot because of all these different decks that we have coming out, and it is a little bit slower, but I do think that it is one of these decks that can definitely consistently win your locals. We have a guy at our locals who always does so well with this deck, and in this deck rewards you knowing the meta, what cards to put into your deck for the meta and against it. And if you do that, this deck can stay consistently competing against every other deck in the game because it has the tools to do it, but it does take a good pilot. And I don't want to, when I'm ranking these decks, I am assuming that anyone playing these decks are very competitive players, and they are using the best of their abilities, and they will pilot all these decks right. I'm putting all these decks on the higher end of pilots, people playing them, and all that stuff, and that is what determines, this deck built and played at the highest of its capabilities is a really, really strong deck that can really, it's kind of like an anti-meta deck where it just tries to counter what the meta is currently doing. And with that being said, is up there. It is definitely a high tier competitive deck, tier 2 on this list, a really strong deck. Going on to the last Demon Slayer deck, we do have the Tanjiro Nezuko brother-sister combo, and it is definitely still one of the absolute best decks in the format. It is so aggressive, so consistent, but I will say, now that people are used to playing against it, it is a little fragile. If you play against this deck, you want to take out the Nezukos, get rid of them as soon as possible, and sometimes you see this deck stall out a little bit because people are being a little bit greedy with their ratios and not running some of the searchers, but you will see in tournaments the people who consistently top with this deck are running those searcher cards, are running those double energy generators, so that way they can make this deck as consistent as possible, try to find that brother combo duo, which what makes the deck so absolutely good. This deck is not going anywhere. A really, really fun, cool deck, and very rewarding to the players. It is, harder to play than other people think because you do want to, line up your brother-sister combo in a certain way to get the maximized efficiency of your attacks. All right. Let's go to the One Punch since it came out before Sword Art Online. I kind of want to do these in somewhat of an order of what they came out. One Punch Man, Garo is a, in the same sense of like Speedo Sound Sonic, Speedo Sound Sonic has performed better than Garo. Both of these decks use certain lists that are like kind of half and half the same thing kind of going on. I do think that if I were to separate it as just like a deck focused around Speedo Sound Sonic and a deck that is focused around Garo, a Garo deck is more of like a controlling deck in the sense of the Hashiras, but it is very forward in the playstyle that it is doing. And it has had some random tops here and there, whereas Speedo Sound Sonic is what a lot of people thought would be one of the more consistent aggro decks in the game, and it is still a tournament topping deck. You will definitely see this randomly in a like one of these in the top 16 or 32 of a tournament because it is just so aggressive. But there are easy ways to the amount that people play One Punch Man is the reason why this deck gets messed up. Because if you just run against a Saitama, you just instant lose, and something like that makes it where it's probably not one of the main decks you want to take into a tournament. If I had to pick, you should just play Tanjiro Nezuko if you kind of like doing those shenanigans over the Speedo Sound Sonic, but still a very, very powerful deck here sitting in tier 2. Above the Gatekeepers, a very strong deck that can really, just steal wins from your opponent with its aggressive nature, but it is a little fragile too, because if you get rid of the one that lets you be able to do your switching, now you're in a tough spot. I am just going to grab all of these up here so we don't have to look at this thing down here. All the rest of these decks, they're not going to be sitting here. I just wanted to pull them up to make it a little bit easier on me so we can roll up here. There we go. So I do think that yellow One Punch Man Saitama is one of the best decks in the format. I am going to keep the green Saitama down here, and I'm going to put Metal Bat in the tier 2 down here. And the Esper Sisters is one of the best decks in the format. Before, when I ranked this deck, I got some comments, people telling me I should not be saying that a deck is not ranked high because people can pilot it back. I should just go into the, idea that all the best pilots are playing these decks because it's in a competitive format, right? And with that being said, the Esper Sisters is a very powerful, strong deck that you will see top in tournaments with some of the best players on it. With that being said, it is a really hard deck to play, and you can misplay with it. So with that being said, I will put it on the bottom of this kind of part of some of the best decks in format. And Saitama Yellow just has so many tools, so many ways to high roll your opponent. It's such an aggressive deck. It will always be one of the middle parts of the best deck in the format. I think that there are so many aggro decks in the format that moves, Saitama down a little bit, right? I would even put it below the Kurapika and the Suzaku, even though it has had a couple more tops than these two decks, but I think only one more. I think, 2 or 3 of each of these. I think actually 4 of the Suzaku and 2 or 3 of the One Punch Man decks. I think that these two decks compete a little bit better against this super heavy aggro format that we're in the card game for some of the best decks. And I think that Saitama loses a lot of those matchups a little bit faster now because it's not able to, get to its end game quite as fast as it would want to, but the power is still there. If you get high roll by a Saitama, you are going to be feeling the pain. And touching on Metal Bat, I think Metal Bat and the Hashira deck are, like I said before, both really competitive control beatdown kind of decks. I think that there's a lot more room to build with Hashiras than there is Metal Bat. Metal Bat's strategy is a little bit more straightforward in what it wants to do, but they are both really strong kind of decks that you can always take into any meta, and if you are prepared to build against it and know what the meta is trying to do, both of these decks can perform really, really well and reward their pilots for it. These are decks that you'd see like a couple of certain people, like I said, our buddy Aaron really running Hashiras, Joey running the Metal Bat. I've seen a couple more people pick both of these decks up because of people like that running these decks and performing really well with them. All right, that is all the One Punch Man decks. So let's get into the Sword Art Online decks, right? Which is a very iconic IP to come into the game because it added a lot more powerful decks than a lot of people thought would happen. The only deck I did not include on here, I think, was the the other kind of like rushy blue deck, the low end blue deck that you could run, that is a Sword Art Online deck. I think that that one is not very competitive, but it's still a fun and cool deck, right? Like most decks in Union Arena are playable and fun, but I don't think I would add it as competitive. But I did want to add the Asana kind of green deck on here because I do think it has a couple of more ways to, really play into the meta and really get rewarded for getting into this Asana, and it really plays similar to how you do with your green decks, where you're trying to build up some kind of late game presence, but instead of having to have so much energy generated, you can get to that point by having those cards in your sideline. I'm just putting it up here to show you kind of like it's a green deck that ramps, but is like ramping in a way that you're trying to fuel your sideline and not really your energy. And I do think that this is a really good kind of like gatekeepery tier deck. I don't think it is quite as consistent or powerful or as aggressive as kind of Speed of Sound Sonic is. I do think that maybe Bomber can really control it really, really well. And I think it has probably an issue dealing with the Garo. But I do think that this deck is a really strong deck, and you should look forward to people randomly playing it in tournaments. And I think you definitely could go like, 4-4, 5-3, something like that in a really big tournament with it, which is pretty consistent, right? One of the decks, let's go ahead and get this green deck out of the way. The green SAO deck has been kind of a disappointment in performance. I think maybe a lot of people were playing. I am not a big print proxies kind of person, and a lot of people were playing this deck before it actually came out, and I think got burnt out on it, right? And that's why we've seen the play rate of this deck down, but I don't think the power of this deck has gone anywhere. I still do think that it is one of the best green decks that you could play. I think it edges out all the other green decks with the consistency that it has. I think that the deck is a little more hard to pilot than a lot of people initially thought it would be, but this deck is still super powerful, super strong. And I really want to put it in one of the best decks in the format, but I can't do it because it's not been performing as well as maybe other people had hoped for. And I think that has to do with just how cool these yellow decks are. Both of these yellow decks, I think, surprised a lot of people with how powerful they both are and how consistent they are. If I really had to put one above the other, I would put the, Goddess deck up here in tier 1. Yes, I do think that this deck is that powerful. I was sleeping on it. I put it, I think, on, outside looking in or not very competitive because I thought that taking your own life would be, too troublesome in a situation with the meta being so aggressive, but it is a very consistent aggressive deck that can really just swarm your opponent, get their life taken down. Now, I do think you get walled out by big bodies, so I'm putting it at the bottom of this kind of tier 1-ish decks, but if this deck is so much fun to play, and I think that these two decks have had the issue of taking away players from the green SAO deck. Even though I do think and believe that this deck is better than these two decks, they are really, really good decks. Holy Knights deck, I'll put it below the two control kind of buildy decks because this is one of the most defensive decks you can play in the game. It has a lot of raid targets. It's really, really strong. It's very consistent. I think, it trying to play so defense is to its detriment sometimes because you don't really have a ton of ways to really push for game as consistent as you want to. And I think that her being 5 kind of puts the deck a little bit slower. She had only been 4 as well. The deck would have been crazy powerful. Definitely a really strong deck you need to look out for. I do think that the Integrity Knights is such a cool deck. But going to the last deck from Sword Art Online, we know that it is Blue SAO, and this deck is so powerful, so incredibly strong with what it does. It can swing 6 checks in 1 turn, on like turn 4 if you're lucky with your setup. It is insane. It is the best aggressive deck in the game, but it is a little high rolly. It could really pop off like crazy. I think that if the Kirito had not been a 5, this deck would have been a problem. But the one Kirito being a 5-drop does make the deck have to slow down a little bit with the energy generation. But I do think that it is a more powerful deck than Tanjiro and Nezuko because you have multiple asanas in the deck where Tanjiro, you really want to see that raid Nezuko, whereas the Kirito deck just needs an asana and name to really be popping off, which I think gives it the edge over the brother-sister deck. All right, where are we going to next? I think that this is a good point to probably start touching on the Bleach decks. And a hot take here, Toshi is one of the best decks in format. I really believe in Toshi. I think that it is, the best green deck that you could play right now. It is really strong with the added packages of being able to play out some characters for free now. You can put in your packages of the Kenpachi's in the deck. I am still saying it's a Toshi deck and not a Kenpachi deck. I think that if you focus around Toshi and you add the Kenpachi package, that makes the deck a little bit more rounded out and really, really powerful. And to be completely honest, I'm going to put it above the One Punch Man decks because I think that this deck counters One Punch Man decks really, really hard. And I'm glad to see Green Bleach doing so well. Toshi getting some time to shine. It's always been a consistent deck right now. It has all the tools to really pressure the Kenny package, lets you pressure your opponent to go for game, and your Toshi package still helps you keep your opponent from, beating you up. All right. All right, Bambietta is a solid deck. I put it in the same sense of Bomber, right? It is probably a little bit better control-y aspect of Bomber. Maybe not as consistent as Gone and Friends, but it is a really good deck that is fully fleshed out. It does what it does. I think the issue with having to blow your own stuff up with the Bambietta stuff kind of gives it a little bit of a trouble to keep bodies on the board and get your value before you get beat out by some of these very, aggro-oriented decks. And I do think that the green decks can kind of wall you out, so it gives it a little bit of a problem, maybe just below the Trio and Garo. She is still a really, really strong deck. Oh, excuse me. But, maybe you go 5-3, 4-4, something like that in a really big tournament. But a very, very powerful competitive deck. You will see people playing this baby deck. It has the waifu tags on it. All those pretty art anime girls in it, too. So people are going to be playing it. And it's just a really cool, strong deck, too. Like, not to take anything away from it. You can, pop off and, it's not the outside looking in. I'll say that. It is a competitive deck that you could take to tournaments and do pretty well. All right, so purple Bleach decks, I will say that, Ichigo, it's one of the best decks in the format. It's still really, really strong. It got some added support into it. There are different ways that you can build this deck now, depending on how you want to play it. I will put it a little bit above the One Punch Man decks. I do think that a recency bias is coming into the game right now where people are hopping off some of these One Punch Man decks as much. This deck just does a lot. It's really consistent. It can blow up your opponent. I do think that, Toshi and Purple Bleach are kind of matchup oriented, wanting to see certain cards or decks that are in the meta. Whereas these other three decks don't really care what they see in the meta. They're going to perform well. But I do think that these two decks are very matchup oriented. They kind of just instant lose to certain decks and can instant win. So they're a little more divisive that way. But they are really strong, consistent decks. And definitely, I think, not going anywhere. With that being said, Renji Rush, I'm just throwing it as Renji Rush because I like the meme on Renji Rush players. It's always just going to be the Gatekeeper deck if you're playing it that way. It just does 4K Rush stuff, shenanigans. But I do think that now you can maybe do a couple of other cool things with Renji Rush. But it's still just like, you gotta be able to beat Renji Rush to be a competitive deck. And Renji will always be used for me in these, tier list videos to show that, you have to be able to, can you consistently raid, get value, and clear 4K bodies, and do shenanigans like that? And if you can, then that probably means that you're in a good spot in the metagame. And I think that Renji Rush style-ish decks are, a great way to see what the best decks are. It's like the easiest way to know if a deck is really, really good. Can you consistently beat a deck that just tries to put out these bodies? And if you can and still get your value and do all your plays, then you're a competitive deck, right? So that's what I use Renji Rush for. Both of the blue Bleach decks, I think, are, really, really powerful. And I think that people just don't have these figured out quite as well as they thought they would. They are definitely very, very powerful, but I think that there's still maybe we need more time with these decks. I do think that they are, you know, the potential to be. If you look at the cards alone, both versions of these decks are really, really powerful. Whether you decide to base it off of Ichigo or, you know, with the 2-drop kind of package, you could do some really cool things with this deck. And it is one of the best decks in the format, but I think that it's just very, very specific in what it does. And it really makes me want to put it down here in like this kind of top of the tier 1, because I don't think these two decks consistently beat out all these other decks, but the power level is there. And I do think if I had a 0.5 tier level, these two decks would be there. And I could just be sleeping on these decks, right? But I do think that they just do a little bit different. I would rather just play the purple Bleach deck as opposed to playing these two, but they are really, really strong and really, really powerful decks. We'll just say 0.5 tier, right? I don't think they're right there in the top, and depending on how many of these other decks we move up, we might just have to put it at the bottom of tier 1. Which is what I'm just going to do. That's what I feel. That's what I'm going to do. I do think that they are, you know, on that cusp where, like, these are kind of gatekeepers to keep people, you know, into the meta. I do think that these two decks are the decks that are going to keep you from being a tournament winner, right? Like, these are going to be decks that perform really, really, really well throughout a tournament. And I think that if you want to top a tournament, these blue Bleach decks are going to have to be the decks that you are prepared to beat all the time, because they're very consistent, very strong in what they do. But I think they both just kind of lack some pressure in ending the game, maybe. The couple of times I played against the decks, I played with, you know, Kurapika, I played with the 3 ladies in red, I played with a couple of different things, and I always had a chance in the game. Regardless of if I started off slow or if I started off hot, I think that these decks don't punish your opponent enough to try to win out the game, which is kind of the payoff for how consistent they are, right? I do think that these will be decks that actively top a ton in tournaments, but probably miss out on getting an actual tournament win because they are, you know, just missing that, you know, punch to win the game and push through, but still one of the best decks in the game, but I don't think maybe quite a tournament winning power level. It's more consistent than Esper Sisters, right? But I do think the power of the Esper Sisters can lead it to be able to sneak in a tournament win somewhere. Alright, this is a long video. I gotta keep rehydrating. Don't forget to drink your water, guys. Alright. That is all the Bleach decks. I have so many things to say. So much good stuff for Union Arena. Like I said, I included all of the, you know, decks from these two sets to kind of like talk about them a little bit more thorough, right? I do think that, my captains is kind of a gatekeeper deck. I really want this deck to be a lot better than what it is. It is a really strong deck, but like how I was talking about with Renji, maybe not gatekeeper. I love this deck. It's one of my favorite decks to build from this set. I think captains is a really, really strong deck. I think that all these decks would have an issue dealing with the 5k body, but maybe just not fast enough to kind of really, you know, make it into that tier 2. I do think that these other decks would control it out, or wall it out, or, you know, just attack faster through it. And I do think that these other 3 decks, the Bomber, Gone and Friends, the Red Trio from Demonslayer, are all a little more consistent than what captains can put out. I think the deck's just missing a little bit here and there. Now, one of these did top throughout the last month, which is awesome to see, and I'm going to work my hardest to try to get into, you know, some of these tournaments too, so I can try to perform well with this deck. I do think there are a lot of tools with this deck to be able to be, you know, kind of in this tier with Metal Bat and the Hashira decks, and that's really where I want to put it, to be honest, because when you do get into the Marioliona, if your opponent doesn't clear her out, they're in a tough spot now, because now you're going to be actively playing out a 4 or 5k body every turn, standing straight up. She's going to boost them. She's 5k. She's impact 1, damage 2. I really believe in this deck. You guys could tell me otherwise. I'm going to put her in this same level of Metal Bat-ish kind of tier, in the middle of this kind of tier 2 decks. I think, you know, you could take this deck, go into a tournament, and, you know, maybe go, you know, 6-2 throughout it, kind of that ish. I don't think any, you know, top 16s with this deck or anything like that, but it is a really strong deck. And I do think that other than Gone and Friends, and I'm thinking about it down here, would have a hard time getting over these 4K body or the 5K bodies that Marioliona puts out. And if Marioliona high rolls, she is really, really strong. I don't think her high roll is as good as the other green kind of rampy decks, but once she gets a little more support, she's going to be doing well. I do believe in this deck. All right, the Dark Triad deck, I think, has been a surprise to a lot of people with how consistent this deck gets off what it does. It's had a couple of tops in tournaments here. I don't know if it is definitely way better than Muzan. I don't think it's like a tier 1 or best deck in format deck. I am just trying to be like, do I think it's down in the gatekeeper kind of tier, or is it tier 2? I think that throughout a big tournament, like I said, we're talking about the competitive tier list, right? This is the competitive tier list. And in that sense, if I would take this deck to a big tournament and expect it to perform well throughout the whole tournament, I do not. But I do think it is in that gatekeeper kind of level where you need to be consistent and fast enough. I'm going to put it above Bambi. You need to be consistent and fast enough and make sure you're able to win the game before this Dark Triad deck gets to turn 8, because at turn 8 on, they do have the potential just to win the game outright, right? So I think that this deck is a really strong competitive deck. It's in the competitive tier, right? Like these two looking outside in, I don't consider those competitive decks. I wouldn't take them to a big tournament, expect to do better than 3 losses, whereas I do think all these other decks you probably can. I kind of want to put it higher because I've just seen this deck do so well, but it's not consistent enough to take to a big tournament. And I'm trying to give you guys the competitive landscape in big tournaments. I don't think you'll see a lot of this deck in there very often, but if you see one sneak into a top 32, do not be surprised because the power of the deck is there. I think with just all these really strong, aggressive, controlling decks, you're going to have a hard time getting there. But it is it's a very viable, strong deck. Now, touching on the other purple deck, the purple Black Bulls deck is a surprise deck. This deck is really good, and I'm actually kind of surprised about it. I don't know, maybe gatekeeper level or tier 2, but I would not take it over any of these other decks, but I do think it is in this tier 2 where, like, if you know what, I don't know, this is one of the harder ones for me. A lot of people really believe in this deck. They think it's very, very strong. I do think that it is better than a gatekeeper deck. Being able to negate what your opponent gets off their value in their life is so strong. I do think it is, it could get walled out by any of these other decks. I do think they could be consistent enough. I think it just has really way better matchups into some of the top best decks in format than some of these gatekeeper decks do. So I'm going to put it in this tier 2 down here. With that being said, I'm going to put the green deck. I really want to put it in that same spot. This deck has an issue getting over 4 and 5K bodies, but it is one of the most high roll decks in the game, only needing 3 energy to pop off, which is kind of insane, but I do think it is really inconsistent in doing that. And to be able to take it into a big tournament in a competitive sense, I would put it along the same line of the Dark Triad of how probably often you're going to get to do that and pop off. I do think it has the issue of probably being a little bit worse, but it's a very powerful deck. If I went off of just power ceiling of what the deck could do in the most ideal situations, it's up here. It's like a tier 1 deck, but it is really inconsistent. And even with the best pilot taking this deck, I think it would sit along this kind of tier down here. But a really strong deck. I wouldn't be surprised if someone took it into a tournament and did really, really well with it because the power level is there, right? Both of the red Black Clover decks are so absolutely strong. Really, really good decks. I can't speak highly enough of either of these decks. If I had to pick one over the other, Asta is probably along the same, level as, like the purple Bleach. Maybe a little bit better because it does have a little bit more value in it, being able, just to keep that Asta going. And I do think that if you're looking to play a control deck, then I think that Noelle's payoff is a little bit better than the Esper sisters. Now, I do think the Esper sisters can get to that maybe a little faster, more inconsistent. But the Three Ladies in Red deck is still a consistent itself, and it has a little bit higher of a ceiling, being able to be that 5k body with impact and forcing your opponent to, you know, have to block your attacks. It's kind of nutty, which is really, really strong. I do think that this deck is really, really good. I've been having a lot of fun playing it. It does feel very, you know, it feels like a more consistent Kurapika, if that makes any sense. It's like Kurapika, if Kurapika had options that let him, you know, stay consistent and get free value. Your Mimosa plays, being able to draw and play options. I literally multiple times have used 6 AP worth of cards in one turn. This deck is absolutely nutty. It is so powerful. Definitely one of the best decks in format. Both of these decks, really hard to pilot, right? But I am assuming that you are a very, you know, competitive oriented player and you are playing these decks to the best of their ability, and they are really powerful decks. All right, another water break because this is going to be a long video. I thought I could get it done in 45 minutes. Doesn't look like we're going to make it there. I appreciate everyone who has hung out this entire time with me. It has been a lot of fun, but we still have one more set to go. And it is going to be the new support for JJK, and I put every deck on here. Do I think all these decks are competitive decks? No. But like I said, it's a new set. I wanted to give everyone my opinions on them, and we're going to probably have half these decks on the outside looking in, and some of these decks will make it into the upper tiers of the competitive scene, right? But the set is new, and I wanted to talk about everything. But the absolute easiest thing to talk about is going to be blue JJK decks. Now, you can consider this 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This would be the 10th deck. I am showing all 3 different versions of the deck to make it a little bit easier. There are 3 different ways you can build blue JJK now. Nanami got some really strong... Oh, excuse me. Strong support. So now I think that you can consistently get to that 15 cards left in deck pretty often. I do think that he loses to control a little bit easier than the other decks do, but it is still very, very consistent. And I would have to put it maybe, you know, all these decks in best deck are, you know, kind of matchup oriented. And if I had to put Nanami here, I would put it just below the you know, Black Clover deck. I would put Toshi below the red Black Clover deck. Toshi sits around blue Bleach or purple Bleach. I would put the Nanami just below that and above these other decks because it is way more consistent than these 3 decks. But a very, very powerful deck. Now, the Yuji is my representative for just the normal Yuji Sukuna stuff. You do get a brand new Yuji, which is going to be a better card to play than the 2 action point drop Yuji, which is going to make this deck be really, really consistent. And spoilers, it is the best deck in the absolute. It is absolutely the best deck in format now. The consistency it got with the deck, the ability to be able to, you know, not have to play that double energy drop. Now you can, you know, that card felt really awkward in some of the plays in the deck. I think that now you can kind of like customize how you play this deck a little bit more, pertaining to like what matchups you see in your locals more, which will make it top more. The deck has everything it needs now. It's just getting so much support. Now I am representing the 7-drop Sukuna as a different version of the deck. This is kind of a build 'em up Sukuna deck, and I think that this deck is, you know, not one of the best decks in format, but definitely a deck that you need to watch out for. And I think that it will be, you know, kind of doing the same thing that green SAO does. You are going to run more double energy generators. I'll make a deck profile for this one for you guys because I'm really excited to play a build 'em up blue JJK deck because now we have a 7-drop that you want to build up for. So we're going to run more double energy generators. You're going to try to like run 3 of the shrines, and you're going to use the engine of blue to ramp you up into these big Sukuna plays to play more like a green deck. And this is definitely one of the decks I'm more excited to look into. You know, in this set, I do think it is a separate deck. You will see some decks maybe choose to run this Sukuna. I doubt it though. more competitive version of the deck is just going to run like, you know, the UG and the normal package stuff that's going on and just updating it with some cards to make it a little more consistent. And I do think that this Sukuna deck is going to be a separate deck. I'll make a deck profile, show you guys what I'm talking about, but it's going to be really cool to play a blue, you know, high ceiling build 'em up Sukuna deck that is going to be really consistent, just like the green SAO deck, where you're going to be able to get impact and, you know, snipe your opponent's board, damage to all kinds of cool things. It's going to be a really fun deck to play. I can't wait to build it. But it's a different deck, right? You're building it because you want to do that kind of play style, and you don't want to kind of play like the super hyper competitive blue version of the JJK deck. This is more of a control build 'em up version of the deck, which is what I'm going to play because I'm a green player, and it's going to feel like a green deck to most people. You will see, guys. Really cool deck, very powerful though, right? It still runs a lot of the same cards, but the goal is to get to this Sukuna and not just like stay with your fours and win the game, apply pressure, get value. It's more of a build 'em up, trying to win on like those 2 big turn plays. I think that's all the blue, right? Yep. We touched up on the blue. Let's stay in the colors that we know were from the previous set, right? So we do have, let's touch up on yellow. We have Gojo, Megumi, and Nobara. They all got support. I do think that Megumi, this deck is scary. It is a tier 1 deck. It is just outside of those best decks. I know that this will probably be a surprise to a lot of people. This deck is going to show up on the scene and win a lot of tournaments, and a lot of people are going to be surprised. Why is this so good, right? Well, it's because they got a new Megumi that is able to, you know, boost the other Megumis up. It's able to clear one of your opponent's characters. It is exactly what the deck needed. And if I had to state, you know, just how strong I think this deck is, it is a tier 1 deck. It's definitely going to be something that you see go, you know, 7-1, just miss out on a top 8, something like that, or get top 8s. This deck is going to be a really scary, really strong deck, and I'm super happy for all the players that have been sticking on Megumi. I would put it a little higher, to be honest, but I do want to see what cards do you have to take out. If this deck ends up being more consistent than I initially thought, it could be up here with these decks. But at the moment, I think it might still have an issue getting over some of the green decks. I do think that it is going to be a more consistent aggro package than the Goddesses, not having to, you know, take your life. This deck is really, really strong. Don't be surprised that this ends up moving on the next one all the way up to the top of this tier 1. But being a combo deck, going to make it a little harder to put up in here. But we will see. Watch out for Megumi. He's coming for you. This deck is going to be really good, really strong. Nobara, I think she is fleshed out. You can run your Nobara Panda decks. It is a solid, consistent Gatekeeper tier deck. Now, I think it is a competitive deck. It's not the outside looking in. She is a good deck now. She's really, really solid. You could do some cool things with Nobara. You can throw in other packages, and it is now a fleshed out deck that can do some really cool things. And if I really had to say so, her control package is pretty good. And I want to put her higher up in the Gatekeeper kind of tier, but I think she is going to kind of sit around where Bambi is, being a more kind of stunning-ish deck, but I think Nobara being able to get that damage too might push her a little bit higher than what I'm currently putting her at, but she's not on the outside looking in, right? She is a good deck. She's a good competitive deck now that you guys will have to watch out for in tournaments. I could see her, you know, pulling a 5-3 record in a tournament, because she's going to have some really good matchups, being able to stun down some of these green build-em-up decks, and I do think that the double blockers will come in clutch whenever you're considering some of these other decks that want to get into multiple swings, and you can, you know, stay pretty well. I think she's going to be sitting pretty good. I kind of want to put her a little higher in this, but it will, you know, I'm trying to be like, give you guys the best information as possible and not be so predictive, but if I had to be completely honest, I would want to put her, you know, kind of in this tier, and I think she controls better than Bomber. She has yellow color trigger, has ways to thwart aggression. She's going to be pretty consistent in what she does. I'll put her at the top of this kind of tier. I'll put her right next to the Bomber. Not quite in that tier 2. I don't think her power is there to win a lot of games and like finish the games, which is kind of like what you need to be able to do in this tier to kind of push up. But she's going to be a really strong, viable control deck. And if your opponent starts off slow, Nobara is going to really punish you. It's going to be such a cool, strong deck. I can't wait to see people actually getting to play a full fleshed out Nobara deck with some other packages in it. Now, my boy Gojo, he is here. He's going to be really consistent now. He used to sit around this same tier as the Hashiras and Metal Bat and being that kind of mid to the ground controlling deck, but he has a little bit more payoff than these other two decks and some very specific ways to beat meta decks. And I think with that being said, I am putting Gojo above these decks. I do think that it could run the Nobara package in it. You could do a lot of different things. You get a lot of support with, you know, your Ghetto and the girl. I always forget her name from the prequel part of the show, but the three of them help add some consistency. You can search out your events now too. I am really high on Gojo. I think it's going to be a really good deck. I think he's going to be really strong. I do think that Megumi maybe... I'll put it just below these two because it is going to be a little slower. I do think that these two decks are very aggressive what they could do and can steal a lot more games. But Gojo isn't tier 1 now, baby. He's going to be good. You might see one go 6-2 in a big tournament, and I would not be surprised. I really highly believe in Gojo now because the consistency, I'm betting on the consistency of this deck, giving Gojo what he needs now to be able to put that big boy out. Hey, you can't target me now unless you're going to pay for it. I'm going to have double blocker. I'm going to have impact. I'm going to have damage 2. I'm going to have all these things. Can you stop it? And if I ever get a yellow color trigger in life, you're going to be in trouble. Gojo is going to be a tier 1 deck. If I had to say I'm reaching on something that might come back to bite me, it might be Gojo. I feel fully strong about the Megumi. And I feel pretty good about what I'm putting Nobara. That is the yellow decks. And we are pushing 50 minutes, guys. I'm sorry. I always have a lot of things to say. If anyone makes it to this point in the video, I appreciate you hanging out. Like I said, I will put this at the end of the video. I'll even put it at the start of the video so that way I don't get anyone, you know. I want people to be able to see this list. I put a lot of time and thought into it. So I appreciate everyone hanging out with me so far. But let's keep getting into it. That are the yellow decks. I put him here only because it's such a cool card, and I want to see what people do with him. I want to exit out just so we could go touch on what this card does. It is a very important card because it's just like a neutral purple good card that people are going to be throwing in their decks, right? It is Toji, which we've never gotten in the card game before, and this guy is a menace. It's an 8 energy, 2 action point, but if the combined total life of your opponent's life is 4 or less, reduce this card's energy required by 2 while in your hand. He comes out active during your turn. He's a 5,000 BP body, so a 6 drop for 2 action points, 5,000 BP body, but it's going to have impact and snipe the turn it's played, which is really powerful. I think that you could see this card get teched into some of the purple JJK decks, and it is going to be really important, but I don't know if anyone's going to build a deck, you know, based around him, but you really could. You could take any other package from all these purple decks and run him because we do have another version of him as well. Where is it at? Like just a generic 6 drop, which is really good. Am I blind? Don't answer that. I know I'm blind. I can't ever see for anything. Whatever, there's a 6 drop. I just can't find it. Because we got an 8 drop, 2 action point of him, and then we got the 6 drop, which is really strong. But I do want to see what people end up doing with him in the card game. Do they just add him to other things? Here it is, yeah, the Toji Fushiguro. This is just a 6 energy, 1 action point draw. This one does stay 5k forever, though. And like I said, this could give these purple JJK decks some legs to go on. I do think it's going to be on the outside looking in. I don't feel comfortable enough saying that, you know, a straight up deck based around him will come up, but I wanted everyone to be aware of it and be on the lookout if they do see this randomly come up, and I did not want to be left out on it, right? We do have a new archetype. We have the red Choso deck, and I think that this deck is, you know, one of those decks where they added a little package in on this set, and it needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. But it does get played with kind of the Ghetto Mahito kind of package. So it's more of a deck that you're going to be playing in this deck. as like a sub package, but as trying to build him on its own, I'm going to work really hard to try to do so, but I don't think it's going to be a very strong deck. And I do think, like the Ghetto does seem to be a really cool deck. It's going to play like a better Phantom Troop deck. It's going to be kind of like what Phantom Troop does, but maybe not as consistent. I do kind of believe in this deck, though. I do want to put it maybe in the Gatekeeper tier, but I really just can't do that at the moment. I do foresee people wanting to play this deck because he is a pretty cool character. It can do some really cool things, and it does have a lot of support for it, right? So I could be really sleeping on this, but I just don't know, right? And I'm trying to give you guys some very information-oriented stuff to go off of, and if I just randomly threw him somewhere, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it, but I would, not feel great by not telling you guys about this deck. I do think that it's a deck that can do some really cool things. I just don't know like if it's going to be a competitive kind of level deck, which I do think that every deck listed from Renchi up, all of these are competitive decks. I'm just listing them in an order of the kind of hierarchy of competitive decks. I will say I believe in it more than these other decks. I think that it has the tools and the cards in it that once someone figures it out, maybe it does end up being a really, really powerful deck, but it takes time to see. Now, I have the Mechamaru and Todo, separate cards, but it's the same deck, and I think that this deck got a lot better. I do think it is better than just a Gatekeeper tier deck. I think that it has finishing power that these other couple decks down here don't have, and I think that the Ultimate Mechamaru is what really makes the deck shine now. I know it's still going to be, you want to play around Todo, but the Mechamaru is going to be the star of the show now. I think that this deck is going to be a really strong deck. I think that this deck is just going to have to be built around whatever people figure out is the best version to build this deck. Because now there's a lot of support for the Kyoto Jujutsu High deck, and I think it is really, really strong. Look really forward to playing it. Everyone knows Todo is one of my favorite characters with the Boogie Woogie. This deck is really, really strong. I would almost put it above, like, I think it sits around that kind of same thing as the Purple Black Bulls, like a solid deck that could do some really good things and maybe finish some games. I could be sleeping on this one a little bit, but I don't think so. I think it's just like a tierish 2 deck. It needs a lot of cards going its way and combo oriented, so maybe not as consistent. Maybe go 5 and 3 in a big tournament, but definitely a really strong deck that you can take that is really, really powerful. And I'm putting in tier 2, but it'll probably end up in like this Gatekeeper-ish tier. I'm maybe swinging a little high on this one, but I do kind of believe that this Mechamaru is just a really strong card, and this deck can swarm your opponent with the package it already has from the Kyoto stuff, so I do think it is a really, really strong deck. It's more consistent and has a little bit more options than these other decks that I think it's above, right? Going on to the other purple deck is going to be Ghetto, Mahito kind of ish deck. Both of these guys, I put them both here because I do think that the deck is going to kind of separate itself now into like, do you go more into the Mahito package or the Ghetto package? I do think that this deck is really, really solid now. I think it is really strong. It's not a meme tier deck. I've always believed in this deck. It just takes a good pilot doing it, and I think a great pilot is going to figure out exactly how to build this deck, and it is going to be like this tier 2 competitive deck along the same level I think now as Todo. Both of these decks are going to be eating good, and you're going to see people really working on these to do some cool stuff, and if I really had to shoot one above the other, I think that this package of the Mahito may be even better than Todo and probably better than some of these control decks, and it might be the one that could sneak into this like tier 1-ish level decks, but we're going to have to take some time to see. I do think it is not on the outside looking in. And finally, we're getting to the last deck, and it is going to be the Jujutsukaisen Sorcerer deck. Now, this deck is fully fleshed out in here. I think it does a lot of cool things. I don't know if it has, like, the power to be a top best deck in format, kind of tier-ish deck. I know that a lot of people are probably disappointed about that because, Blue JJK is just crazy strong, and they gave it more support, and I know that they're making this deck kind of be the star of the show kind of deck, and it's just not on the level of the blue JJK, right? Like, it's not one of those decks up here, but I do think it is a pretty solid fleshed out deck, and I do think that it is going to be kind of in this gatekeeper-ish tier, kind of with, you know, the Nobara and the Gon. It feels very kind of like, I think it needs a little more support because it kind of plays like 13 court guards does, but you don't have as many 13 court guards. It is not an outside looking in deck in a competitive sense. I think it might be. I think it might be. I think I have to put both of those decks on the outside looking in. I do believe probably a little bit more in the sorcerer deck. I think it is not going to be in the competitive kind of ish tier list. It being the new color too, I could be absolutely so wrong on both of these decks. But I don't think that either of these decks will be kind of a competitive deck. I do think that they could be gatekeeper decks because I don't think that they're like. But I'm trying to say like, excuse me, competitive decks, right? And I don't know if there'll be a competitive level deck that you'll see topping in tournaments. I could be absolutely wrong with these. And I really... they have so much support. Can they be competitive decks? This is the hardest part of the whole video. They could be gatekeepers. They could be on the same level as this. I think they're... Not every deck has to be a competitive level deck, right? In each set, there are decks that are just absolutely better than the rest of them. Now, I do think that this is going to be a fun, fleshed out deck. Like I said, this is the competitive tier list. I don't think that these decks quite make it into the competitive tier list, but I do think that the purple JJK stuff, and that makes a little sense now that I'm thinking about it, right? Blue, purple, and yellow got support from the first set, right? So now they're all fully fleshed out competitive decks that you could take, whereas red now is the new one that got the most support, but we don't know how it's going to play into the meta, and at the moment, I foresee it being an outside looking in. I could be wrong. Maybe one tops randomly here and there is going to be a very popular deck, but we will only see in the future. If I had to say so, it could be in the gatekeeper deck. I don't foresee it being like a tier 2 and above deck, not a tournament topping deck, but maybe something you can break even with. Alright guys, this has been a doozy of a video, a full hour for me to do this one. I appreciate everyone hanging out with me. I always have a lot to say. I know that can make these videos take a long time. But I really appreciate everyone that has hung out with me until the end. But let's go through the best decks in format. I have Blue JJK, number 1 deck. Number 2 deck, Purple codegeass. Number 3 in the rankings, I have the Blue Sword Art Online deck. Number 4, I have the Brother Sister Tanjiro Nezuko deck. Number 5, we have the Red Black Clover deck. The Black Bull version so strong. In 6th place, I have Toshi, the green. He's just staying there with the green Bleach deck. In 7th, I have the purple Bleach deck. In 8th, I have a deck that is based just around Nanami. I think that's really, really strong, but we're going to, kind of see that be a kind of hybridish blue deck that'll probably be top in tournaments. In 9th place, I have Yellow Saitama. That deck's not going anywhere. Still really, really strong. Next up, I have in 10th place, No L with the 3 ladies in red. And in 11th place, I do have the Esper Sisters. Now, I really do only like to keep this as 10 decks in the top, but the way that it works out with Blue JJK having so many different ways you can build it, I think that both of these decks are different enough now that they both have to go into the top. But if we just did IPs, say Blue JJK as 1, then this would technically be the 2nd best deck, or the 10th best deck, but it is 11th on here, right? I think that the game is in a very healthy, competitive place. You could play so many decks. We have 47 different decks on this list. We're almost pushing 50 for competitive, and that is a great problem to have in a card game. I'm going to be working hard, still trying to keep Kurapika relevant. I'm going to get my, JJK decks in order with Gojo trying to do some work, and I'm going to keep working on my captains, that's for sure. And, Gone and Friends always has a place in my heart. Maybe we could do some stuff with the special purple boy down here. But I appreciate everyone hanging out with me today. I know this has been a long video. Please share this video. Get on this tier maker. I want to know what you guys think, right? Get on here. Make your own tier list using this. I have all the cards uploaded on it. And on this tier list, I actually have some cards listed below if you want to make it a full one. I have so much fun doing this. I want to know what everyone else thinks. Do you agree with this list? Do you think it's trash? Let me know in the comments down below. I appreciate it. Leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys. Peace.